Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start by saying I applaud you for making this the first of a series of rigorous oversight hearings on Russia. The committee's gone for about a year without a full committee hearing on either Russia or North Korea, so I appreciate your leadership in this regard. And now it seems to have taken a three-ring circus of a debacle of a meeting with President Putin, a walk back of whether the president trusts his own intelligence officials, the suggestion that it might be even okay for a U.S. diplomat to be interrogated by Russian intelligence, and a reality TV summit that was little more than a photo op with a brutal dictator to merit one hearing with the Secretary of State. Having said that, Mr. Secretary, welcome, and thank you for your service to our country. The members of this committee are strongly supportive of strategic, well-crafted diplomacy to advance America's foreign policy interests. Unfortunately, all we've come to expect is a saber-rattling president who embraces and provides legitimacies to some of the world's most notorious bad actors, and who denigrates our closest allies whose sons and daughters have gone to war alongside Americans. We've not seen any substantive deals or strategies that put Americans or American national security first. We've seen our president look weak as he stands beside our adversaries and intends to roll out the red carpet at the White House. I hear that's postponed till January, but nonetheless, to invite Putin to the White House, a thug who is actively trying to undermine our elections. Well, Mr. Secretary, we in this body are taking heed of our intelligence and law enforcement officials and working to protect our country from the flashing red lights of ongoing Russian aggression. Senator Graham and I and others plan to introduce legislation in the coming days to ensure we have the toughest tools to go after Russian bad actors. As of this moment, we find ourselves in an unimaginable situation. The American people, elected officials in this body, and members of the President's own cabinet have heard more about the meeting in Helsinki from Putin and his associates than from our President. We know that the Kremlin state-run media operations have a dubious commitment to the truth, but we don't know what the truth is because nobody else was in the room where it happened. The American people expect, and I believe they deserve to know, what happened. I also have serious questions about the summit in Singapore that took place nearly 2 months ago. In that time, we have yet to hear or see anything that provides us with real confidence that North Korea, as the President gloated, quote, no longer poses a threat to the United States, or that we have a coherent strategy to achieve a verifiable denuclearization agreement. We've only seen a vague agreement of promises to make more promises, but of weaker commitments than North Korea has previously made. The United States and North Korea seem to remain far apart on even basic issues such as the definition of denuclearization. In fact, over the past 18 months under this administration's watch, North Korea has perfected its intercontinental ballistic missiles and tested its largest nuclear detonation rather than any verifiable steps to dismantle their program. It seems Kim Jong-un got everything he wanted in Singapore, including international recognition and the suspension of U.S. military exercises. Now, this week's reports of dismantlement at a launching station may be good news, but it may simply be a signal that North Korea has completed all the testing it needs to. Frankly, the Singapore agreement seems more the art of concessions than the art of the deal, and we are weaker for it. Last week, Russia and China blocked a U.S. request to impose penalties on sanctions violations, calling our maximum pressure posture into question. As you know, I've introduced bipartisan oversight legislation along with Senator Gardner to provide the sort of support and guidance that this diplomatic effort needs and exercise the oversight responsibility Congress owes to the American people. Goals that you previously laid out before this committee are incorporated. Finally, let me raise one more deeply alarming issue that broke this week. I understand that despite its ability to stop this ridiculous notion, the State Department is about to allow Internet posting of do-it-yourself 3D printable firearm blueprints. Why on earth would the Trump administration make it easier for terrorists and gunmen to produce undetectable plastic guns? I remain deeply concerned by the administration's incoherent and contradictory views. We need comprehensive strategies across the world because the result of the lack thereof is chaos and confusion, or even worse. I recognize the President considers himself to be a masterful deal maker and a very stable genius. But we need to call the President's statements out for what they are. At this point, I find them to be misleading and untruthful. So I look forward to your testimony to find out what the truth really is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, we welcome you again. And you can summarize your comments. If you have any written materials you'd like to enter into the record, we will do so. And with that, we look forward to your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman Corker, Ranking Member Menendez, and distinguished members. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. During my confirmation hearing, you asked me to work on a host of world problems. And for 12 weeks, I've been doing just that. I hope we'll get a chance to talk about each of those today. The last few weeks, I've engaged in 3 areas of particular interest to this committee: North Korea, NATO, and Russia. On the subject of Russia, I want to bring something to your attention right off the bat today. Today, the Trump administration is releasing what we're calling the Crimea Declaration. I won't read the whole thing. I will submit it for the record. It's been publicly released as well. But one part reads as follows, quote, "The United States calls on Russia to respect the principles to which it has long claimed to adhere and to end its occupation of Crimea." End of quote. I want to assure this committee that the United States does not and will not recognize the Kremlin's purported annexation of Crimea. We stand together with allies, partners, and the international community in our commitment to Ukraine and its territorial integrity. There will be no relief of Crimea-related sanctions until Russia returns control of the Crimean Peninsula to Ukraine. This Crimea Declaration formalizes United States policy of non-recognition. There's another indicator of diplomatic progress I want to mention. This morning, Pastor Andrew Brunson, who was imprisoned in Turkey for nearly 2 years, has been let out of jail at Bucha. He's still under house arrest, so our work is not done. But it's welcome progress, one that many of you have been engaged in, something the State Department has been working on diligently as well. We will continue to work for the speedy return of all Americans unjustly held captive abroad. President Trump will never forget about our own. Our diplomacy on these issues is advancing the goals of President Trump's national security strategy, which laid down guiding principles for American foreign policy in December. In late April, I started executing on the strategy as Secretary of State, and today, on July 1st, here we are, and I want to present you some progress. The national security strategy established protecting the American people, the homeland, and the American way of life as the pillars of our national security. On July 17th, President Trump stated his firm conviction that diplomacy and engagement are preferable to conflict and hostility. These principles have guided our actions on North Korea. President Trump's diplomacy de-escalated a situation in which the prospect for conflict was rising daily. Americans are safer because of his actions. As far as the Trump administration's goals on North Korea are concerned, nothing's changed. Our objective remains the final, fully verified denuclearization of North Korea as agreed to by Chairman Kim Jong-un. As a follow-up to President's successful summit with Chairman Kim, on July 5th, I traveled to North Korea to make progress on the commitments that were made in Singapore. We're engaged in patient diplomacy, but we will not let this drag out to no end. I emphasize this position in the productive discussions I had with Vice Chairman Kim Young-chol. President Trump remains upbeat about the prospects for North Korean denuclearization. Progress is happening. We need Chairman Kim Jong-un to follow through on his commitments that he made in Singapore. Until North Korea eliminates its weapons of mass destruction, our sanctions and those at the United Nations will remain in effect. Multiple UN Security Council resolutions require North Korea to eliminate all of its weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile programs. Those resolutions were passed unanimously, and they remain binding. We absolutely need every single nation to maintain the enforcement of those sanctions to which every nation is committed. The path ahead is not easy, but our hopes for a safer world and a brighter future for North Korea endure. The national security strategy also calls for peace through strength. President Trump's engagement on NATO has resulted in greater burden sharing that will strengthen the entire alliance against myriad conventional and unconventional threats. Allies have spent more than $40 billion in increased defense spending since 2016, and there will be hundreds of billions of dollars more in the years ahead. Last year's $14.4 billion in new spending was a 5.1% increase. It was the largest in a generation. 8 allies will meet the 2% this year. 18 are on track to do so by 24. The Trump administration is demanding that every country make its own commitment. NATO will remain an indispensable pillar of American national security. We know weakness provokes our enemies, but strength and cohesion protect us. The more every NATO member contributes, the better the alliance can fulfill its mission of deterring threats to each of our nations. This is the increased commitment that the President wants. From the outset of this administration, the National Defense Strategy and the Russia Integrated Strategy, our approach has been the same: to steadily raise the cost of aggression until Vladimir Putin chooses a less confrontational foreign policy, while keeping the door open for dialogue in our national interest. Between our two nations, the United States and Russia possess over 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. President Trump believes that two great nuclear powers should not have a contentious relationship. This is not just in our interest, but in the interest of the whole world. He strongly believes that now is the time for direct communication in our relationship in order to make clear to President Putin that there is the possibility, however remote it might be, to reverse the negative course of our relationship. Otherwise, the administration will continue imposing tough actions against Russia in response to its malign activities. We can't make progress on issues of mutual concern unless we're talking about them. I've heard many of you on this panel say that for years and years. I'm referring to key issues like stopping terrorism, obtaining peace in Ukraine, stopping the civil war in Syria, and delivering humanitarian assistance, ensuring security for Israel, and shutting down all of Iran's malign activity. And on the subject of Iran, President Trump has said that Iran is not the same country it was 5 months ago. That's because our campaign of financial pressure, our withdrawal from the nuclear deal, and our full-throated support for the Iranian people, which are articulated in a speech this past Sunday, are having an impact. In Helsinki, we sought to explore whether Russia was interested in improving our relationship, but made clear that the ball is in Russia's court. We defended America's fundamental strategic interests in Syria and Ukraine, and I personally made clear to the Russians that there will be severe consequences for interference in our democratic processes. I would also add that President Trump is well aware of the challenges that Russia poses to the United States and our partners and allies. He's taken a staggering number of actions to protect our interests. As just a few pieces of proof, I'd like to cite the following: 213 sanctions on Russian entities and individuals in the Trump administration, 60 Russian spies expelled from the United States of America, and the closure of Russia's consulate in Seattle in response to Russia's chemical weapons use in the United Kingdom, the closure of Russia's consulate in San Francisco, cutting U.S. diplomatic staffing by Russia by almost 70%. 150 military exercises have been led or participated in Europe this year alone. More than $11 billion have been put forward for the European Defense Initiative. We made defensive weapons available to Ukraine and to Georgia. And just last week, the Department of Defense, this is after Helsinki, added an additional $200 million in security cooperation funds to Ukraine. None of this happened for the 8 years that preceded President Trump. It's not enough for you. There's a long list. I'm happy to go through them. I'm guessing sometime today I'll get that opportunity. I look forward to it. Finally, I want you to know President Trump has stated that he accepts our intelligence community's conclusion that Russia meddled in the 2016 election. He has a complete and proper understanding of what happened. I know. I briefed him on it for over a year. This is perfectly clear to me personally. I am also certain he deeply respects the difficult and dangerous work that our patriots in the intelligence community do every single day, and I know that he feels the same way about the amazing people that work at the United States Department of State. Thank you, Chairman Corker.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The Secretary of Staff has asked that we absolutely stay to the 7-minute deal. So if we could not ask 5-part questions and end at 6:58, if you could give the respondent time to answer within the 7 minutes too, I'd appreciate it. With that, I'll defer to Senator Menendez. I'll withhold my time for interjections along the way. Senator Menendez.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, when the President meets alone with President Putin, it allows the Kremlin-sponsored state media and the Russian Ministry of Defense to provide more information, at least from their perspective, not only to the American people, but sometimes it seems to the members of the President's own cabinet. So I'd like to ask you some questions to get to understand what actually happened. Has the President told you what he and President Putin discussed in their 2-hour closed-door meeting in Helsinki? You could put your microphone on.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. The presidents have a prerogative to choose who's in meetings or not. I'm confident you've had private one-on-one meetings in your life as well. You've chosen that setting as the most efficient way.
I just asked you a simple question. Did you? You can't eat up my 7 minutes, Mr. Secretary. Did he tell you whether or not what happened in those 2 hours?
Yes, Senator. The predicate of your question implied some notion that there was something improper about having a one-on-one meeting. I completely disagree with the premise of your question.
I didn't ask you a predicate. I asked you a simple question. I hope we're going to get through it. Did he tell you what transpired in the 2-hour meeting?
I've had a number of conversations with President Trump about what transpired in the meeting. I was also present when he and President Putin both gave us a sense of what they discussed in the meeting that followed immediately after.
Did you have?
I've also had the chance to speak with Sergei Lavrov twice about the Russian view on what takes place. I think I have a pretty complete understanding of what took place.
Did you speak to the translator who was at that meeting?
No, I haven't.
Have you seen any of her notes?
Senator, I have never. I've been in lots of meetings. I've had lots of note takers and lots of translators. I've never relied on the work that they did.
Did the president
understand what took place in that meeting, and it does not need to be done here, and won't be.
Did the president discuss relaxing U.S. sanctions on Russia, including CAATSA sanctions?
Senator, the U.S. policy with respect to sanctions remains completely unchanged.
So the president did not, is what you're telling me, that I ask a very specific question.
Yes,
did
Senator,
the president tell you that he discussed relaxing Russia's sanctions or not? Yes or no?
Senator, presidents are entitled to have private meetings. I'm telling you what U.S. policy is. I came here today.
No, but you told me that he had a conversation with you in which he told you what transpired. I think the nation and so all of us who are policy makers deserve to know so that we can fashion policy accordingly. Did he tell the Putin that I'll release or ultimately relax sanctions?
Senator, what you need to conduct your role, your appropriate role, I will provide you today. That is United States policy with respect to the issues you request. You asked me about U.S. policy with respect to sanctions, and I can confirm to you that no commitment has been made to change those policies in any way.
Did the president at this meeting call upon President Putin to withdraw from Crimea and eastern Ukraine?
Senator, I began my statement today with the United States government's policy.
I understand the declaration. I welcome it. I'm glad that it seems like we had to do a lot of effort to get there. But the question is, when he had a chance, did he confront Putin and say, we don't recognize your annexation of Crimea, we don't recognize your continuing hostilities in eastern Ukraine, and there's consequences for that?
Senator, the president was very clear with Vladimir Putin about U.S. positions. They're the U.S. positions that are the Trump administration's positions, and he spoke about them very firmly and clearly when he met with Vladimir Putin.
And he told you that?
Senator, I'm telling you what he had a conversation with Vladimir Putin about. And I'm telling you what U.S. policy is today. I understand, Senator, I understand the game that you're playing.
No, Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, I don't appreciate you characterizing my questions. My questions is to get to the truth. We don't know what the truth is. And the only way that we will know what the truth is, what transpired in those 2 hours, in a highly amazing period of time to spend alone, one-on-one, is by understanding at least that if you were briefed by the president, what he told you. I don't think that's unfair to know, to understand what policy is. Let me ask you this. Did the president say they were going to change our force structure in Syria?
Senator, presidents are permitted to have conversations with their cabinet members that aren't repeated in public. I owe the president the capacity for him to have conversations with him, provide him the best foreign policy advice that I can. It's what I was
Let me ask you this, Mr. Secretary.
So
here's something you can answer for me, because you're not going to answer any of the questions that would get us to the truth. As CIA director, you stated in an interview with the BBC that you fully expect Russia to continue its attacks on our democracy by attempting to interfere in our midterm elections as we speak. In his conversation with Putin, I hope the president laid out the consequences of interference in the 2018 election. But I know you can't tell me that, so you're not
Actually, I can't
tell
you
do you
that,
want to
Senator.
share that one with me?
I can't. No, I can't.
That one you want to share with me?
No, Senator, I can tell you that because the president has disclosed that.
Okay.
The president disclosed what he said to Vladimir Putin about Russian interference in our elections, and he said that he is confident that as a result of that conversation, Vladimir understands that it won't be tolerated.
I wish he had said that in public in Helsinki. Let me ask you this. Senator Graham and I and others are working on a new bill to hold Russia accountable. Given that you assert the administration is tough on Russia, will you commit to working with us on a new Russia sanctions bill?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. North Korea. When you last appeared, I asked you a series of critical questions about what's our policy in North Korea, and to your credit, I must say that I largely agreed with what our goals are. Now I want to ask you, since we haven't heard anything, not a classified briefing, not anything as it relates to North Korea, did North Korea agree with our definition of denuclearization, meaning the dismantlement, removal of all nuclear weapons, facilities, technology, and material from North Korea?
I think I can answer your question, but let me begin by saying I'm engaged in a complex negotiation with the North Koreans, and so I don't intend in this public setting to share the details of every conversation that took place in those. But I will attempt to answer your questions without disclosing the contents of the negotiation. I am very confident that the North Koreans understand our definition of denuclearization, a very broad one, that it goes from infrastructure and nuclear warheads through chemical, biological weapons.
We understand it because you laid it for the record. Have they agreed with you that that is?
I believe they thoroughly understand that, and
they understand it, but they didn't agree. Did they agree to end the production and enrichment of uranium and plutonium for military programs?
Senator, I would welcome the chance to respond to your questions. If you'd let me finish, it would be most
simple. Yes or no.
I think it'd be most illuminating for the folks watching.
It's a simple yes or no.
Could you repeat the question, please, Senator? It was the previous question I didn't have the chance to answer.
Surely. Did North Korea agree to end the production and enrichment of uranium and plutonium for military programs?
They've agreed to denuclearize fully. Yes, Senator.
Okay. We don't have.
Yes, it certainly includes. It certainly includes the full.
I would love for you to come to a classified setting and tell all members what exactly transpired, because we don't know.
Thank you, Senator Risch.
Mike.